Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geeks Cant, the home of RPG goodness and general tomfoolery. My name is Zach, and I have a single host joining me this morning, the mayor of Fort Wayne, Troy Sandlin.
The dedicated mayor of Fort Wayne. That yes, I will appear for all my constituents at any time.
Beautiful. At least every Sunday and Tuesday and Wednesday mornings, every once in a while.
That's right.
And then we've got our special ghost, a special ghost. Yeah, well, fair enough. Our special guest and creator for the morning stream. Danny, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Morning to this morning where I'm at, I am under a blanket of snow. We've got a
Oh,
record snow here in the upper Midwest, and we're out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we're
mm,
just being hit by these repeated slices that drop like a couple of inches, and it's cold enough that it's sticking. So,
wow.
yeah, I got to clean off the car before I head down to the shop today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a dusting here in Kansas City over the week, over the last day or so, but it is what it is. That's Kansas for you. We get a dusting of snow at this point, and that's about it. So,
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we still have we've had winters where it was real mellow, and then I have a feeling this year with the snow coming early, it's going to be a real. We're gonna about mid-December, it's going to show up, and it's not going to leave till
it's
about
like,
mid-February.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Well,
But we
Troy,
all have SUVs up here, so we don't care. We just plow on through. And luckily, the Delvingwood shop, which up until very recently had been my garage,
yeah.
um, is still only about 8 to 12 minutes away from where I am down a
Oh,
major
not bad.
thoroughfare.
Mm,
So if I have to run to the shop and run back a couple times in the day, it's not that big of a deal, even if there's snow. So that's been a big upgrade for us in terms of getting into a space where anytime you have a small shop, there's either room to put things together or room to make the things in the first place, but not both. Now we have at least the capability. We got about 1,500 square feet
mm,
where we
Nice.
can make the stuff and then assemble it and then fulfill it all out of one space. So
nice. That's so good, so useful. Such a like I have, my stuff is largely contained to the office, and I still get sideways glances from my family, uh, once a week. So I can imagine when it's your garage, it is a weight that you carry.
yeah,
Hmm.
and my partner and wife Susan has always been someone who appreciated the
Mm,
fact that I was a
great.
maker. So when and we're also not so far up the pecking order that we can't. We've always bought used cars and things like that. So they sit outside. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like we don't. I don't have a garage to keep a car in. I have a garage that is just another room that I can make weird stuff in.
Perfect.
And she's always been super supportive. We're a gaming family through and
Oh,
through,
awesome.
so we all role play. My wife has been gaming with me since the early 90s. I've been gaming since the early 80s. Weekly game
Mm,
every week, pretty much
amazing.
since 1985.
Wow.
Uh, Different players, different times, so on and so forth. But like, that's been a through line for us this whole time.
Oh,
That's very cool.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Troy,
I'm
you
told how
missed out.
lucky I am. I mean, I guess I agree. That's pretty lucky. So.
Absolutely. Troy, you missed out though. We had a little pre-show, pre-live discussion, and Danny and I were gushing over Dune and William
Hmm.
Gibson and other golden age sci-fi. So that's what you miss at Troy and chat whenever you don't pop on right away. These great chats about cool stuff. But yeah, Danny, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on. We're excited. We're going to be talking about your live Kickstarter called Delving Wood. Delving Wood,
Yep.
all one word, here in just a couple moments. But yeah, super glad you reached. I think we kind of reached out and circled each other
Yeah.
for a couple of days before we were able to lock it down. So,
Yeah, and I know that as someone who collects, obviously the Delving Wood product is just one of the things we do, but it's a terrain product. It's a game terrain product for TTRPGs, and uh, but I've got all the Dwarven Forge stuff. I've got all of the Dragonlock stuff. I guess I'm a connoisseur of terrain, and when and I love all those things. I got nothing but love for Dwarven Forge.
Right.
And Stefan, met him many times at conventions. He's a super great guy, crazy,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
crazy New Yorker. I think he's from Brooklyn. I don't want to overspeak though, because you say somebody's from Brooklyn and they're not, that's a problem. But I love all that stuff, and I think ultimately where we kind of started this whole thing was, well, what do we want? All these other things are great, but for one reason or another, there would be times where we'd be like, oh, I wish it would do this or that. And I think where Delvingwood started was just our own personal solution, like what we thought was cool.
Hmm.
Right. Right. So let's get into it a little bit. So Danny, before we dive into Delvingwood, I'd like to hear, and I know a little bit, but I'd like to hear you talk for just a few minutes about. You talked about growing up as an RPG player. What got you from playing RPGs in the '80s into saying, I want to spend at least a part of my working life doing that?
Well, that actually was a really tough decision.
Hmm.
As we all know, this industry is full of passion and full of creativity, but is in the end kind of a hobby industry. It's a little squishy, right?
Yeah.
So when you think like, how much time can I put toward this?
Yeah.
Uh, I had been satisfied with just writing things for myself and being a designer and being a graphic designer. I would always take my own personal materials and turn them from scritchy notes into, like, I'd lay them all out and I'd do professional looking maps and all this stuff no one else would even see,
Yeah.
right? And that's when I realized that's probably the artistic impulse right there,
Yeah.
where I was like, I'm basically writing publishable stuff. Like, I could hand this over to a publisher. Now, whether they would like it or not, that's a matter of taste. But to me, I was just like, why am I doing all this work just to satisfy myself? And then I would show it to other people. They're like, dude, this is really good. You should publish this. But I had no idea. And I think ultimately I just realized probably my first best destiny was to be a designer. So I kind of just stopped thinking of it like a hobby, and I kind of moved into thinking of it more like, well, I just need to start working with people. And that's how my relationship with Brian Berg over at Total Party Kill Games started. Um, and how I got involved with the Wizards of the Couch. I was one of the Wizards of the Couch for the better part of a year, doing interviews much like this, and part of Blackwood Publishing. So there was just, I guess I just finally decided I was sick of doing it for no one but myself.
Absolutely.
Right on.
I I like the idea of it being something that you were already doing, right? Like, and you just felt like the natural extension is now just to shift to showing other people the thing that I'm already taking on. It's not like, you started playing the game and you're like immediately like, oh, I think I could make this, and you immediately went and started publishing or trying to publish stuff. Like there was this incubation period where you discovered what Danny likes to make
Right,
before anyone else ever saw it. You got to see and have these years where Danny got to discover, like, what is my favorite thing to do when I sit down at a table or when I'm DMing or whatever. What am I making that I feel is useful or that I get
right.
joy out of? And then the natural progression, or the progression that you took from hobby into business, was, how do I take the thing that I already know I like and just sell it, right? That's cool. I like it.
And part of me, not to be uh, high-minded about it, was I felt like I was making little artistic objects.
Hmm.
Like, it wasn't just notes and scribbles and a map done with a Sharpie, which I also love doing that too. I've done that millions of times running on the fly. Um, but like, I was making something more than just the thing's function. Like, so much of what I was doing had no purpose other than to bring me joy.
Right.
Hmm.
And if there's a definition of art that's better than that which exists that has no purpose other than to bring someone an emotional reaction, then I was doing art, you
Yeah.
know? And once I realized that was a big part of it too. Like, I wanted to share my art with other people, even though it's just maybe A lot of people don't think graphic design is art, maybe, but I do. It has all the same decisions that you make when you make art, So, and I think you know that, right, Zach? I mean,
Yep.
you've got some chops in graphic design too. When you finish a great design, you're like, wow, that turned out great, So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, working in a sign shop for, I was, like, 7 years, like, yeah, absolutely, it's art because you know how it's art? Because there are people who can't do it.
yeah,
That's the
and there are
reality of
people
it.
that will critique it endlessly.
Yes, exactly
Yes.
right, yeah.
I say that those are you know, two good markers right there. That can everybody do it? Nope. Are they going to critique it when you do it? Yep,
Yep.
it's art.
Yeah, and the critique, I trained classically as an architect. I got a degree in architecture,
Awesome.
and the school I went to was brutal. When you went up in front of jury, that's what they called the review process. When
Mm,
you went in front of jury, these people were just witheringly uh, brutal
mm.
in their critiques, and it really taught me that when someone says, just something mean to you, you have to be able to like eat that, take what nourishment you can from it, and then just keep moving forward because uh and a lot of times they're right. This is the other thing. Hubris has to go out the window. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah.
gotta, there's so many times where someone will say something brutal and you'd be like, dang dude, why'd you say that? And then about a week later I'm like,
That's
oh,
why you said
now
that, yeah.
I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when was this about how long ago was it that you decided to go from purely hobby into dipping your toe into professional RPG?
Probably about 10 or 12 years ago. It started back right around 2010. We had been invited, and this is completely separate thing. We'd been invited over to this group called Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order, and they are a Cthulhu running group,
Mm,
Cthulhu game running group at Gen Con. And we had been invited to run this thing called the Cthulhu Open. And not to bore you with all the details, but a lot of people pay a lot of money to play in the Cthulhu Masters, and then they get eliminated in the semis, right? So these
okay.
people that have spent all weekend immersed in this game and they don't quite make it to the end, we were the game that they could then go play at the same time as the Masters finals were happening, so that they still had something to do in that final slot. And we would run modern Cthulhu. Basically, we ran a series called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, where we wrote three separate uh, 8-hour adventures for 13 players, fully immersive, locked in a room,
Mm,
had to just play the whole thing out. That focused on one was everybody was trapped on a 747 planes. Another, people were trapped in the subway under New York City trains, and automobiles was a Nazi plot to go back in time to the Le Mans race where all those people were killed
mhm,
back in 1977. Automobiles.
mm.
And we played in subsequent years. We ran these separate things. We had players come back, and there got to be a point where people started paying like ridiculous amounts of money to play in these games with us. And that's when we realized, hey, we could be professional GMs. This is way back before anybody was talking
Yeah.
about that. But we sometimes covered our entire hotel bill
Yeah,
for like Gen Con, which is no small number.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so that was kind of the beginning where we saw like, hey, game could be something more, and people like it. So,
Mhm.
and then it just kind of naturally rolled forward as we started writing stuff for various people and so forth.
Now, in your planes, trains, and automobiles adventures, I have one question. You don't have to go into detail. Were there pillows?
Were there pillows? Oh, were there pillows? No, but I will
Those weren't
say this.
pillows.
Those weren't pillows. Those aren't pillows. Uh, but I will say that we had a mechanism in the game where during the automobile, uh, the third thing, we had everybody clear all the tables out of the room and everybody grabbed a chair. They were in a car. Their chair was their car. And then as we played, we would have them switch positions of their chairs. So if you took the lead, you got to pick up your chair and go to the front of the line.
Oh,
and
that's
everybody
cool.
was jockeying for position on the racetrack. And then inevitably, of course, there was a terrible, terrible crash. And without any prompting from me or any other GMs, this guy runs forward toward the wall with his chair, smashes into the wall, falls over onto the ground, and puts his
Oh
chair on top of
my
himself.
gosh.
And then the next player makes a check to see if they can avoid it. And
Oh
if they
my
avoid it,
gosh.
they get to keep going around the track. If they don't, they basically just laid their chair on top of the guy and sprawled themselves on top of it.
That's
And in the
amazing.
end, we had a pile of like 6 people all wrapped up in like conference room chairs.
Oh my
And
gosh.
somebody was like, "Is there an explosion?" So we make a check. Yes, there's an explosion. So then all these people are writhing and screaming as they're dying on fire. Uh, but that had nothing to do with what we had planned. I mean, these players just took that and were like, "Well, okay, we'll end up in a burning heap of metal and human flesh." So it was it's that kind of stuff that kept us coming back.
That's fantastic.
Well, again, I think we're gonna end up stuck on here for longer than we expected. But I always like when somebody brings up a system like that that's not D&D. I always like to ask like, what draws you to Call of Cthulhu?
Uh, I think the simplest answer I can give is everybody deals with fear in a different way. And sometimes feeling too safe when you're dealing with fear kind of steals a little of that. So when you're playing Cthulhu, everybody's sharing their fears in the same room. They're very vulnerable. They're taking on roles that maybe they wouldn't have taken on before. We've had 6'5" ex-Marines playing like 5'2" genteel ladies from the early 1800s. And the depth to which these people will jump into that role, alter their voice, and then you're watching them do it, and you're like, "Oh my, you look like a linebacker," but you're speaking in this stilted English prose. Uh, it's that capability for people to like deal with the things that we're trying to scare them with, but then bring their own approach to it. Cthulhu encourages the players to bring a lot back,
Right.
whereas I think sometimes in D&D you don't have to really role play.
Hmm.
You don't have to. It's kind of a poorly named game, honestly, because it's really a war game that they just call a role playing game a lot of times. And I think with Cthulhu, it's definitely the other way around. It's a role playing game that has some really kind of jacked up rules, to be perfectly honest. I don't think the rule set is all that great. Uh, but it allows enough flexibility that you can really, really role play. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's just the capability that everybody feels they can role play their fears out.
Awesome, awesome. Well, okay, cool. You've satisfied my curiosity. Now let's talk about. So we know a little bit more about Danny. We know about his progression into the industry and some of the things that you find interesting there. But what we're here to talk about today, or the reason that we made a connection, is because you just launched a Kickstarter. Um, and Troy and I. I mean, we were just talking about this project on Sunday. We talk about a ton of Kickstarters all the time. But this one is a little bit different, and we like to chat with folks who have something a little bit different that they're bringing to the table. So, uh, why don't you go ahead and give us the elevator pitch for Delvingwood?
Well, quite simply, we wanted to make something that was durable, simple, could be played with any level of player, so just to tick those boxes off. We didn't want anything super complicated, heavy. We wanted to make it here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
We have nothing against making it other places too. There's lots of places you can get good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't begrudge anybody their opportunity. But if you have the capability to make it here and employ people here and so forth, that's an important thing as well. We produce all of this stuff right here in Milwaukee.
Mm.
And even our wood is sourced from Canada. So when these were just kind of ideas we had for what the product had to be if we were going to feel good about making it. But then the other thing was we found that when we used things like Dwarven Forge or Dragon Lock or these types of things, it was all up to the GM to set everything up. And they set up the rooms and they clicked it all together. And then if something changed or if the GM wanted to pivot, now he's got to move all these pieces and take it all apart, and like it's not as fluid as I like a game to be. So we intentionally didn't put connectors on our pieces because we want the players to be able to pick them up and move them around. If somebody says, hey, I notice a little stairway back in the corner, they can just grab a stairway and throw it right down on the deck, and then they can play with that. And when we're done with that room or that set piece, we just sweep it all off and make another room. And
Right.
it's not, and it's more, I'm always looking for ways to involve the players more
Hmm.
because I think it's a GM heavy hobby, right? Like a lot of it falls on the GM. So when we made this, we wanted something that was a quality product made here, something that was easy to use. Kids could mess around with it. You know, you weren't constantly telling Timmy, "Keep your hands off a dwarven forge." Uh, it was just like, "Hey, here's a bag of tiles. Make a dungeon, kiddo." That's the lessons that I want to teach a 5-year-old. I want to say, design a city, design a thing, and then when they do that, say, now you could put a monster here, you could put a monster here, and this could be a trap, and all that kind of stuff. Ideas that they're familiar with from video games too, right? Like
Mhm.
like these building games. So it's a big ask to ask people to change the way they play. Um, but I think that there's a lot of different play styles out there now that were not around even 10 years ago,
Mhm.
much less the 80s. God, in the 80s, it
Oh
was
yeah.
just like, we were lucky to have vis-a-vis markers and a battle mat. Uh, I don't know how many times I carried that dang battle mat around with me to conventions, 4 feet long, sticking out of my backpack,
Yep.
Mhm.
half dry vis-a-vis markers that were leaving marks all over it. And this kind of satisfied, that.
Mhm.
And it looks nice. It doesn't look like anything else. One of the things that we really want people to be encouraged to do is craft on top of them too.
Hmm.
Like buy a set. Now you got 60 pieces. You already have your base pieces, so, and they're durable and they're ready to rock and roll. They're not made out of foam. you know I've made lots of stuff out of foam for sure, but like this is a little bit more tactile, heavy duty piece, and you can still glue stuff all over it, paint it up, make it look however you want it to look. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of like why we set out at this in 2018. And of course we got delayed by the pandemic.
Yeah.
There's just people weren't gathering. It seemed
Right.
like a crazy thing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I
But I don't
like.
know if you had any other questions about that. I don't really know. I guess
Yeah.
that's as close as I can come to an elevator pitch.
That's perfect. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. So yeah, I was sitting here saying like, all right, so we've got this guy who is super into the role play side of RPGs and who is putting on these crazy Call of Cthulhu things, and then your Kickstarter that you're bringing is a terrain kit, and I'm like, and then you brought up Dwarven Forge. I'm like, you're right. Dwarven Forge is beautiful, is it? It's absolutely gorgeous. And as much as it implies immersion, really, it's creating a linear track because
Yeah,
by and large, if you build out a set piece, a scene, you must progress through that scene. And that's great for certain types of games and the tactical side of Dungeons and Dragons, right? And that
right.
sort of thing. It has its place. But yeah, it makes a lot more sense now that you looked at that and you said, this constrains my role play or my party's role play in certain ways that I would like to avoid. So can I make a terrain piece that can be beautiful and that can have a lot of detail and things like that that I admire about Dwarven Forge, but is something that we can shift around a little bit more and that could be more quickly adjusted to the whims and whimsy of myself and also the players at the table. That's cool.
Yeah, well, I think what it comes down to is there isn't going to be a pure situation. Cthulhu is probably as close as I ever come to it, where you really need nothing but the people and someone to run it. That's it. It really is true
Right.
theater of the mind. Um, but for most games, there's going to be that point where somebody says, "Am I behind the corner?"
Yeah.
or am I not behind the corner when that magic missile comes flying my way? And it's sort of like when we played, fantasy battles when we were kids and running around in the backyard with our, playing war, playing soldier, or whatever it might be. There was always the great debate. I shot you. No, you didn't. You know,
Yep.
and so there's always room, even in a heavy theater of the mind game, where someone's going to say, "Where am I? And
Yeah.
where's the bad guy?" And I think I got him in range. You know, and I don't want to deny people who want that to be their joy. If
Mhm.
that's their joy, then I don't want to tell them no.
Mhm.
But I also don't want to set up for 12 hours a huge dungeon and they decide to go north
Right.
and the whole dungeon is south. I mean, just so we all know, the trick on that is you just flip the compass. But yeah, I'm sure we all know that. But some of the viewers may not. But uh, it's just frustrating when you take all that time and then they don't explore all of it. Or
Hmm.
but this way, you just kind of build it as you go. Whichever, if they pivot left, build to the left. If they pivot right, build to the right, and you're not constrained. Um, yeah, I think that's a really good description of it.
Yeah, the way you describe that, because I build terrain as well. Um,
Yeah, I heard
and
Zach and I were
and
talking.
and I do the foam and all that kind of stuff. There was an adventurers league adventure that had you went into this node and there were these floating rock lumps and the bad guys were up there and stuff was going on. So I'm like, oh, that would be really cool to see. So I built it and had the
Yeah.
floating rock lumps and everything. The players come in, I put the thing down on the table and I have it all set up because it was all one big piece. And they positioned their characters at the mouth of the door and never moved.
Yep.
And it's like, it's there's stuff to climb on and stuff. No, we don't want to get close to the bad guys. Pew 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 pew. It's like you all suck.
Yeah. Exactly. And and quite frankly, I've looked at that situation and been like, yeah, that's pretty much what I would do too. It's like I can't even honestly tell them that they should do something different because I got so swept up in making this cool set piece that I forgot they could just stand at the door.
Well, see, my champion fighter, my human champion fighter would run right in there
Right.
and mix it up because that's what champion fighters do, Zach.
Yeah, I think too, right, that I'm always willing, like being a GM for so long and being sympathetic to the needs of GMs. I'm the guy who, even if it makes no sense for my champion to run in there, I'm running in because I see that Troy spent like 18 hours building this cool thing, and I'm going to use every square inch of it uh, to get what I want out of it.
That's
Uh,
right.
but but a lot of players don't. They don't care about
They're
that stuff.
mean. Players are
They're mean.
mean.
That's
They're
right. They're like, we'll teach you.
selfish.
We'll teach you to be creative.
That's right. We're just gonna stand over here, or we're gonna go left. Ha!
Right. Right.
So another question that I had, or another thing that came to mind was like, we see a lot of uh, different types of terrain come through, and we talked a little bit about, as a throwing it out there sort of play style, that's something that can make Delvingwood a little unique. The other thing that I think is unique about your project is that you have some really unique pieces, right? That it's not just like here's a set of square tiles and square hallways, and some square tables to go in the middle of them. But you've taken the time to come up with some clever ideas or some original shapes to where you've got the standards. If you just want to work with standards and you need a lot of standards, that's great. But you also have these other funky things, and even once you get into add-ons, you get even funkier, right? So, um,
Right.
I don't know how long we need to spend on that, but I wanted to, for folks who are listening to this as a podcast or who haven't checked out the page yet, this is not just your standard set of terrain. This is a wide variety of pieces that you can build a lot of different things with.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think one of the things that we tried to do too, we came up with this idea of the make a tile, where the simplest one we have is just a 4 by 4 inch square that has a 2 by 2 inch missing in the center.
Hmm.
So you could use it as a balcony if you just use
Yeah.
the outer rim of it, right? It's a
Right.
balcony that you can look down into, right? And you get enough of these pieces that you can kind of stack them up to create some 3D effect. But again, it's really just to create enough of an idea that your mind theater can grip onto it, right?
Yeah.
It's not intended to be like, now is the wall really this color green? You know, like in Dwarven Forge, sometimes they're like, is this treasure that's in this puddle really there? No, there is
Yeah.
no treasure there, but the guys at Dwarven Forge made it look cool, and God bless them. But like sometimes it's too much, you know. Uh, and so when we made these Mega tiles, you can drop anything you want in the middle, and we're going to put out a bunch of special tiles, like a pit trap or a
Mm,
cool, spiked depression or a puddle, that you can drop in the middle of there. And maybe we eventually get to the point where we start doing a little bit of resin stuff on top of it, because we have the capability to do 3D printing and
Hmm.
resin as well in our facility. So I think that's part of it, is like we're trying to come up with these things where you can use it one way or another way or 15 other ways.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, uh, I was trying to think. We ran into that exact same situation. It was with a card game though. These little I don't know if you ever played the card game Saboteur, but in
Okay.
Saboteur,
Yep.
you're gnomes building out a tunnel system, and some of you are trying to sabotage it. And the cards are, there's cards that are crossroads and cards that are straights and cards that are right angles and all this, right? And every time you introduce this game to someone, when you start laying out those cards and some of the artist couldn't just have, no minds be bland tunnels. They had to put little skeletons over in the corner or little piles of treasure or gems sticking out. And inadvertently, every time you introduce it, somebody's gonna be like, "I have a card that has a treasure piece on it." I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that you're the lucky
Yeah.
gnome and now you have coins.
Right.
You you are just it is just cool. It's just that they didn't want to make 16 of the same card, so they put a treasure piece on this one. But yeah, it all those little details are immediately assumed to be there by the player, right?
Mm.
Right.
Because it's what they see. And I play with I don't have a set of Delvingwood yet, but I have a set of cardboard tiles that are just squares that I whip out with my kids, and they when they run D&D, they want the box of tiles that they can lay out, and then their imagination, like you said, just goes wild because the tiles are just tiles. They're just blah, right? But that's fine because all they wanted is this is the size of the room and you guys are here and there's a doorway over here, right? And then they get
Right.
to paint the rest of the picture and it
Right.
works perfectly, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, you hit upon something really interesting there. We're under no illusion that we're competing with Dwarven Forge. Those guys are the kings. Like if you want realistic, quote unquote, fantasy uh, things, that's where you go. I just recently was able to buy used some of those lake pieces
Oh
that they
yeah.
did
Oh yeah.
with I mean, there's a reason why that product line probably didn't do very well, because I don't think there was any way to make money on what they did there. That is a true work of art, and probably pretty pricey to assemble. Uh, but for us, we want to be somewhere in between. Remember those Malavo or Malino? They came out for Confrontation, that French game Confrontation, and they were these really detailed tiles. They
Mm,
were like the Wizards of the Coast tiles,
okay.
where
Hmm.
it was about 12 inches square, but they had some 3D aspect to them, where there
Yep.
was these little spacers you could build different levels to them. And
Mm,
Yes.
so, like, that's kind of where we exist. We want to be somewhere right above the cardboard, somewhere above, obviously, the vis-a-vis markers on the battle mat, but even further along. Uh, Utilizing these because they create a 3D effect. Like you
mhm.
can be up higher or lower. And I gotta say, when your champion is standing on top of a pile of rocks and they're surrounded by orcs down below, there is something visceral that happens during the game where you're like, this is cool. Look at me. I got my sword above my head. The orcs are all swarming up on me, but I know I'm going to be victorious because you've created a little special thing for them to be on,
Yeah.
Hmm.
so I guess that's kind of where we hope to fall, is a more utilitarian version of like a Dwarven Forge or something like that.
Right on. The what I like about these, because I've seen, the laser cut uh, terrain pieces. I've not seen terrain like this. At Gen Con, our booth was right across the aisle from a company that does. They were all buildings. They were all
Yep.
pieces,
Right.
and it's like, and they look. they look fantastic. But
Right.
it's like, I don't. I'm one of those types of gamers. It's like I'm not going to build the town. You don't need me to build you a town.
Right.
You know, because even having a floor plan for a tavern is really not necessary because all you're doing is talking. You're not
Right.
or having a bar fight. You don't need all that. But it's like, but they look amazing. But now you have something that you can use in almost every session.
Right.
And you can even go and get some of that other stuff and use with it. Or like
Yeah.
you said, build extra
And
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and we're phase two of all this. If this goes well, and we already feel like we've been vindicated already, the Kickstarter funded. Is it going to blow the doors off every Kickstarter in the world? Of course it's not. It's our first Kickstarter. We're realistic about it, but we want to get the idea out there. But we have a whole, I'll just say it here first. We have a whole cavern set that is all irregular pieces. And some of these things look like intestines. I mean, we've done some really crazy, twisty
Hmm.
warrens kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And we also have started working on tiles that look like wooden flooring.
Nice.
So if you want that in, because maybe something more than a conversation or a bar fight might happen, you can just lay some of these things out. Plus, we're doing these add-ons that are more like rooms. Like we've
Hmm.
got a sewer, we've got a necro tomb, we've got a that are being offered in the current Kickstarter. So you can just throw down a thing and say you're in the tomb. Bam, put your figs down. Um, so we're trying to create. I totally agree with you. The reason that those people do buildings is because buildings are rectilinear and most of these machines can only do squarish stuff.
Yeah.
Well, in a dungeon, it's not all squarish stuff, but in a city, largely, it is. Unfortunately, most people don't play city adventures.
Hmm.
Right.
So you can have all the coolest buildings in the world, but if your adventure is not taking place above ground in a building, they're just going to gather dust, you
Hmm.
know? So, yeah, I hope that there's some universality to what we're doing where people will see it like you just mentioned. Like, you can make anything with these,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if I give you some wooden tile, like the wood texture tiles, or if I give you some pebble tiles, or if I start increasing the number of types of things you can do, then we can get even more creative.
Yeah.
And that is coming.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Phase two. Phase two.
Phase two. I like that.
Interesting. So we're probably getting close to the end of our chat here. Troy, was there other things that you wanted to draw attention to or chat about or ask questions of before we and chat? This is a good time if you're watching this live for you to post questions as well.
Uh, I just want to go back to what Danny said way earlier and talking about how you can glue things to these tiles and make them your own and blah blah. I would be remiss to glue anything to them because I wouldn't want to ruin them because they're very. I'm going to use the overused word. They're very bespoke. They
Mhm.
have that. They have that quality to them. Like when I become an old gamer and I'm in the gamer retirement home, I would pass this down to much like a curated dwarven forge set. You would pass this down to your
Right.
grandchildren or whatever
That's nice of you to say.
because they have that look, they have that quality. You could stain them up if you wanted to, you could paint them up if you wanted to, but then you could also be like how I am and watching some of the YouTube creators that do terrain, and you can still do all of that stuff, making your fireplaces and your tables and your whatever else to then fill in this terrain. When you get the wood floors, you could fill in the tavern with tables and stuff. You can use and it lends itself so well to that creativity because just looking at the pieces, scrolling through your Kickstarter and seeing it's like, oh yeah, I could see a use for this. I could do this, and oh, maybe create something that does this. And like you said, you're going to do some traps and things like that. That's fantastic. And the fact that you have that make a tile, if you put everything up on something, now your pit has depth.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just they're not super thick. They're durable because they're wood. You're good to go. So it has so many different boxes that it checks
Yeah.
that I really, really dig.
My folks and my family at large is are big board gamers, huge board gamers, and my folks especially love Catan. And a few years ago, my wife took the time. She ordered off Etsy a set of wooden Catan tiles, like all the squares and the
Yep.
framework for it, right? And then she bought it, and then we took them home. So it would be a product for those listening at home. It'd be a product very similar to Delvingwood in kind of craft, right? Um, Took them home and we spent a weekend painting these tiles to look like the Catan wood and stone and yada yada,
Yeah,
right?
I know exactly the
Right,
set you're talking about.
right. And then she gave them to my folks for Christmas that year, and that is important to my folks now, right? Like it is
Yeah,
this Troy, you said bespoke, but it is this thing that elevated a game that they liked already, but now
right.
pulling it out, like, there is a significance to it. There is a memory attached to it. There is, an importance placed on that set that there was not there in the years and years and years that we played Catan before that set came into being, right? And so I do think you're right, Troy. Once we start playing with, like once we get out of the realm of Chessex mats and cardboard tiles and we get into, you
Chessex.
know, uh wooden pieces made by artisans and artists, and we get into Dwarven Forge and things like that. Once you get into this realm, you're not just buying something because it's a game accessory that you might pull out every so often. It's really about it's about elevating the experience of the game each time it's used. And
Hmm.
there's a it's engaging um, with a ritual almost aspect, certainly a reverence aspect that you now bring to this game, and all of your emotions about how much you enjoy Catan or Dungeons and Dragons are now almost like channeled into these artifact pieces that
Yep.
we are all laying on the table and checking out. So, yeah, that
Yeah, it almost gets to the point where somebody borrows that, right, and they have it at their house, and they're like, "Let's play Catan." But our thing is over at Zach's house, and they're like, "Well, let's just play something else,"
yeah,
because
exactly,
they don't want to play without it. You know what I mean?
exactly,
Like
yeah,
it
yeah,
kind of ruins the game for them because they can't play with it. And no kidding, one of the things we talked about before I duck out is trying to come up with a board game that uses these same tiles,
yeah.
like a dungeon
Mm,
building game. And on the back of the tile, we put text that has different values. So as you're playing, you flip the tile. Oh, I can put a 45 next, and the
Mm,
45 only be 2 points, or a cavern piece, or whatever. So there's a lot of things you can do with a concept like this
hmm
that isn't necessarily just, well, we're making dungeon tiles for TTRPGs. Maybe there's a board game in all of this. Who knows?
Very
I,
much. Shadows of Brimstone. Are you familiar with that game?
I don't think I am. Shadows of
It's
Brimstone?
Brimstone.
Yeah.
It's a big box game, lots of miniatures, and that's exactly the way it works. It's kind of an intro into role playing games, kind of. You're going into these dungeons and you are randomly flipping the tiles down,
Mhm.
or you're pulling a card that says, "Okay, use this tile next,"
Right.
and then the little booklet will tell you, "Okay, put a monster here, put a monster here, put a monster here,
Right.
treasure token, go."
Right. Right.
So yeah, because that's what I was thinking too. Because like, especially your I'm not sure how to the technical term for it, but your whopper jawed tiles,
Your Whopper jaw tiles. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, the caverns and the rat warrens and stuff. That's kind of what those tiles look like for that
Yeah.
Shadows of Brimstone. And it's like, oh man, you could have a bespoke version of Shadows of Brimstone, which would
Absolutely.
be
That'd be
freaking
fascinating.
awesome.
All right. Well, hey, we've kept up too much of Danny's time at this point, but Danny, I really appreciate you popping in and
Yeah,
chatting with us. It's been really great. Yeah.
Right on, right on. I appreciate you guys taking the time.
Absolutely. So, chat, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning. Everybody go check out Delvingwood Collectible Game Terrain over on Kickstarter. We'll post a link down in the show notes when this is on YouTube, so that you can go directly there and check it out. It's a cool project made by a cool guy, and you should definitely throw some money at him. So, Troy, I think that's it unless you have something else.
Uh, only to say, play great games on some great bespoke terrain.
Awesome. All right. Well, Danny, thanks again so much. Where can people
Thanks a
find
lot,
you
guys.
if they want to reach out, send you an email or a message or something? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Danny at delvingwood.com.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Danny. Thanks so much, Troy. Thanks so much, chat. And I guess until next week, we'll see you next time.
Peace, Zach. Peace, Troy.
Thanks.